Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Ryan Cooper. Just me on the intro today. This time we're talking with Nick Hanauer, who is an investor and entrepreneur, and Joan Walsh, who is the national affairs correspondent for The Nation, about their new book, Corporate Bullshit, Exposing the Lies and Half-Truths That Protect Profit, Power, and Wealth in America. Title is pretty self-explanatory, but, talking about the rhetorical strategies of the right to prevent things like unionization, increasing the minimum wage, that sort of thing. We did unfortunately have a couple of audio problems on this episode, so the quality will be a little shaky at spots, but easily comprehensible, and next time we should have those ironed out. So sorry about that. Anyway, without any more procrastination, let's get to our interview with Nick Hanauer and Joan Walsh right now. Joan Walsh and Nick Hanauer, welcome to the program. Your book is called Corporate Bullshit. I like a nice punchy title myself. It certainly doesn't beat around the bush. We're not talking about some sort of post-structuralist academic, piece of philosophy. But can you give us, talk about, maybe starting with you, Nick, give us a sort of like basic wrap of what you're talking about with the term corporate bullshit and maybe some examples, from history. You've got some real juicy ones in there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, guys, thanks for having us on. It's really fun to get to chat with you. Well, let me zoom out and just give you a tiny bit of context for where this thing came from. So both I, Joan, and our co-author, Donald Cohen, are longtime activists and have been pushing on a variety of issues to try to, create more justice in the world in our own ways. For me, the sort of defining piece of work that taught me about this stuff was the $15 minimum wage, which we cooked up in 2012, a long time ago. And what was so interesting about that experience was that everywhere you turned, people would tell you, our opponents would tell us that if you raise the minimum wage, it would kill jobs and harm the very people we intended to help. And the thing about that is that claim is not true. And there's no empirical evidence for it. And what was interesting is that over the span of time, more and more empirical evidence flowed in showing that claim was not true. That in fact, when people are paid more, they buy more stuff, and that's where jobs come from. Obviously, if nobody has any stuff, if nobody has any money, who will buy the stuff? And in a moment of clarity, which should have come far earlier in my life, I realized that I was not in a contest over facts or truth. I was in a contest over money and power. And that the folks, my opponents, weren't saying this thing about raising wages would kill jobs because it was true. They were saying it because it was the most effective thing they'd ever found to keep wages low and profits high. And it was really, so the really interesting thing about that claim is that the Chamber of Commerce never, ever, ever, ever says the truth, which is screw you. We don't give a rip about you and your family. If your wages are low, our profits are high, and that's what we care about. Right? Like, why do they never say that? Like, ever. And so I have this great friend named Molly Crockett, who is a neuroscientist and does research in human moral reasoning. And I asked her about this because I found it really fascinating. She's like, oh, this is very, very simple. The most important element of human moral reasoning is intention. What do people intend? Which is why if you deliberately kill somebody, you go to jail. And if somebody jumps off a bridge and hits your car as you're driving by, you're probably not going to be in trouble, despite the fact that both people are equally dead. And so when you realize that and you begin to zoom out a little bit, you realize that every objection that people make to increasing justice is some form of that thing, which is clothing antisocial goals in pro-social language. And as luck would have it, our colleague, Dawn, had spent, out of frustration with the same thing, had spent a sabbatical in a library, I think the Library of Congress, digging up thousands of these damn quotes. And he had arranged them in this sort of database. And he kindly gifted that database to my team at Civic Ventures. And we didn't know what to do with it, rather. But we finally realized that if you show people these quotes way back in history, right? Like people have been saying the same things for hundreds of years. If you give them that context, then it becomes so clear what these strategies are and why you shouldn't believe it in the future, right? It effectively inoculates you against future bullshit. And basically in every corner of the world, wherever people are trying to protect power and profit, they use these techniques. And so we were like, okay, the coolest thing ever would be to take all this stuff and turn it into effectively a coffee table book so that people can see these things and respond and understand what's happening to them, how these tricks work. And so we grabbed our friend Joan, and together we marched off to try to, for the good of the order, try to let people know how this stuff works. And that's sort of the background of the book. And all of us, and Joan, you should speak to your own experience, have come up against these things time and time again in our work in every corner of, policy and politics.
That's the end of the preview, folks. As usual, we like to mention that this podcast is sponsored by the American Prospect magazine. So if you want to listen to the whole thing, you can subscribe at $5 a month if you want that, plus a free subscription to the website, plus the opportunity for a steeply discounted print subscription. You can do that if you so wish at $10 a month. And otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.